Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Alice McKay Room here at the Vancouver Public Library. My name is Dylan, and I am a librarian on the Arts and Culture team here at VPL. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I am a settler in these lands, which means I have a responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism where I live, and to take sincere actions towards decolonization, especially in my work here at the library. And I am so excited to see everyone here tonight for the latest part of the Incite series. We're very grateful to the Vancouver Writers Festival for this partnership, which brings the most engaging writers right here to your library. We've had a great run so far this year. A quick show of hands, who has been to one of the Incites already this year at some point at the library? All right, a good amount. And who's here for the first time ever in this space tonight? All right, a lot of people. That's awesome. We love to see it. Before I pass things on to Sarah, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. If you need to exit the room during the event, please use either of those doors there. You can leave and re-enter at any time, and the closest washrooms are located to the right of the doors. Also, please take this moment now to silence your phone. Make sure that it's on Do Not Disturb so that it's not bothering everybody around you. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass the torch to the programming coordinator of the Vancouver Writers Festival, Sarah Wong.
Thank you, Dylan. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to everyone who is joining us online. And thank you to Dylan for the introduction. My name is Sarah Wong, and I'm the programming coordinator at the Vancouver Writers Fest. We are grateful to live and work on the lands of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. It's April, so happy spring, and happy National Poetry Month. We are so excited to have 4 poets with us tonight: Jen Currin, Sheryda, Warner, Conor Kerr, whose conversations will be moderated by Bronwen Tate. Before we introduce Bronwen, we'd like to thank our government sponsors: the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of British Columbia, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island, and of course the Vancouver Public Library for making it possible for us to present conversations like these free of charge. So I've been practicing this for a week, so I hope it's not very awkward. But as we all know, April showers bring May flowers, as well as May bestsellers, which you may have seen in your flyer when you came in. So Incite continues every Wednesday in May with authors from the BC and Yukon Book Prizes. We have an event with Casey Plett and Hazel J. Plant that is moderated by VPL's very own Candy Tanaka, who's in the back right there. We finish Incite with John Valiant on May 31st. Our bestseller series, which you may have seen in our flyers as you walked in, brings Margaret Atwood, Louise Penny, and R.F. Kwong to speak on their newest books. Please check our website, www.writersfest.bc.ca, for more information. A few notes for tonight's event. After the show, the authors will be signing books on that side of the room. Thank you to Book Warehouse for being here today and providing these titles for sale tonight. And audiences will also receive a feedback survey in their emails. Please let us know your thoughts and experiences on tonight's event. We use them to make our events even better. So now on to the show. Bronwen Tate is the author of the poetry collection, The Silk the Moths Ignore, and a contributor to the collaborative book-length poem, Midwinter Constellation. A citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, Bronwen earned an MFA in Literary Arts from Brown University and a PhD in Comparative Literature from Stanford University. Her work has been supported by Stanford's DARE, which is the Diversifying Academia Recruiting Excellence Dissertation Fellowship, as well as by the fellowships from the Stanford Humanities Center, the Vermont Studio Center, and the Banff Center for the Arts and Creativity. Bronwen teaches poetry, creative nonfiction, and creative writing pedagogy at the School of Creative Writing at UBC, where she is also the undergraduate chair. Please do check out her Substack newsletter called Okay But How, which goes deep on process and also includes snacks. So thank you, Bronwen, and enjoy the show.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, Tanya. Hey, Daniel. See some friendly faces there, which is wonderful. So it's my tremendous pleasure to be with you. I've had such a delight spending time with these books, and to get to be with the writers is really special, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So we're here basically to hear some poems and to think together about why we turn to poetry as readers, as writers, and about what poetry can do in the world. So I'm pleased to be joined by these three writers. Jen Currin is the author of Trinity Street. Behold! As well as the story collection Hider Seeker and 4 other poetry books recognized by an Audre Lorde Award, a Lambda Literary Award, and other honors. Jen grew up in Portland, Oregon, like me. We should talk about it sometime. And now teaches at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Conor Kerr is a Métis Ukrainian writer whose latest book, Old Gods, is hot off the presses, and I think, in fact, the official publication date is like late April. Yeah. So we're really lucky to have it here tonight, sort of a preview. Conor is the author of the poetry collection An Explosion of Feathers and the novel Avenue of Champions, which won a 2022 ReLit Award and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Sheryda Warner is the author of Test Piece, ta-da! As well as the previous collections Hard Feelings and Floating is Everything. Her work has been selected for Best Canadian Poetry and the Next Wave Anthology. Sheryda is also my very dear colleague at UBC, where we share clementines and scheme on how to make everyone else love poetry as much as we do. It's going all right so far. I see at least one student in the audience, so we're doing well. All right. So I have a question or two I'm going to ask these writers first, then we're going to hear them read from their work. Then I have a few more questions for them, although I doubt we'll get through my full list, but I'll live with that. And then we'll have some time for questions from you and possibly questions from you who are, it's all right, I'll grab it, watching from a remote location via this iPad that I have been given instructions how to manage. So we'll see how that goes. Teachers and tech. So I want to begin by asking each of you if you'd tell us something about like a question that was on your mind while you were writing or revising the newest book, these books we're here to talk about. So it could be a question about the world, could be a question about how to write. What was a question that was kind of with you while you were writing and revising these books? And we can start with whoever's ready. Sheryda, you look ready.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I was thinking about questions of seeing, I guess, seeing the self. I caught myself, like a reflection of myself in a window, and I didn't recognize myself at this point, and then I just wanted to see that self more clearly. So I think it was a question of encounter, maybe. Yeah.
Beautiful. How about you, Jen? What was a question on your mind?
I think maybe one of the central questions would be, what is friendship and what is community?
Mm-hmm. I can see that, absolutely. How about you, Conor?
Pardon me. I normally wear a cowboy hat to these things, so I'm kind of like nervous without that emotional protection on right now. So
I can imagine the hat now. It's okay. The invisible cowboy hat is there.
Thank you. I think my big thing with this book was really looking at the displacement of Indigenous peoples within our home territories. So in particular, in Amiskwaciwaskahigan, Edmonton, Treaty 6, where most of this book was written. And just thinking about my own family, my own community there with the Papas Chase Cree Nation and the Métis communities with the Gladue and Ginther families, and our displacement throughout the territory, but still being essentially in the same spot, but not necessarily knowing it's home, but trying to figure out what that relationship really means to land.
Absolutely. let's hear some poems, and then I'll ask some more questions. Conor, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I can. I kind of realized that most of this book is about my grandfather. He passed away a couple years back. He was old. He was in his 90s. He lived a great life. But we had quite a good time together over the years, and it kind of prompted my Nokam. When he died, then my granny, who informs most of my writing in general, she moved to Vancouver Island, and then I followed her to Vancouver. So it's kind of all worked out in a good way. I'll start with a poem called Prairie Dust. The morning when you realize home never existed, it's just in the idea of the dirt and dust kicked up by pickup trucks at uncontrolled prairie intersections where the rustiest bucket gets the right of way and the coolest farmer barely twitches the finger on the top of the steering wheel to acknowledge you coming back from cities that only work over the money that you make from self-destruction, from selling out, from abandoning a dream. All the things that when you wake up, you'll try and unsee. It gets the darkest before the dawn. That's okay. Home is when you realize that there will always be a story living on. All right, we're going to get off the prairies. We're actually going to come out to Vancouver here. And this is my ode to being a visitor on these beautiful, beautiful territories. My first book, An Explosion of Feathers, had a lot of magpies in it. And so now I got to switch birds since they're not really out here anymore and look more into the crow game. So crows are the magpies of 2022. Great title. Great title. Magpie poetry ended the moment I got bombarded by Burnaby crows, picking mussels at low tide and dropping them on seawall tourists, which is really what we all are. They scatter under shells and avoid the shit from 1,000 crows circling, cawing, posting up outside the police yards under the Cambie Bridge to keep an eye on those who impose false justice when a crow court is all that was ever needed to keep some semblance of order on this land. Towing lower middle class income lines, always on the brink of owing someone everything, when a crow owes nothing more than a couple shells to sprinkle down on concrete. I try to find myself within their song, but it doesn't echo home, as we both know that I'm just a passing visitor on this land, invited guest, but it doesn't make a difference because I'm out of my element of flat, open spaces. I want a boat, but I'll satisfy myself with looking out at the False Creek wreckages and wonder what stories they've all seen. What stories and worlds do the crows see on their sunrise and sunset migrations back to Burnaby? The ultimate commuter. I'm displaced but not out of order. I can take a big wooden spoon and stir up False Creek to kick up the leftovers and the shells that the crows can't reach, so they know that I'm paying tribute. Are crows native to here? Whoever thought it was a good idea to sell my truck was mistaken. Whoever thought it was a good idea to try to impose colonial governance on all these territories stretching far across this land was mistaken. It'll come back on them, just like these fucking crows come back every day. All right, going with the swearing theme. This poem, I'm going to dedicate to my good friend Allison Beardsworth. Who the fuck stole my catalytic converter? I'm a foregone conclusion, wrapped up malevolence in a fabricated smile, screaming inside while laughing and speaking the language of bureaucracy mimicked from years of listening to vague promises. I'm a tipped-over shopping cart outside your storefront window, possessions and ancestry laid naked, bare for academic analysis and research into failure of genetics to turn me the color you wish to see in professional development. I'm a catalytic converter hacked off on thunderstorm nights under quarter moon skies, making cash for diversity and inclusion. Numbers are just a scrapyard shoved full of precious metals to be sold off to the highest bidder. I'm a lukewarm coffee cup, sitting beside a steaming bathtub spilled across white porcelain to be lapped up by the rising waves of a back eddy's whirlpool, sucking down and down and down and down and down. All right. I'm going to do two more. The title track to this unit, Old Gods. one of the things I guess with that question too about the book is I'm always curious about just the spirituality of the land itself and where you see religion in what, even from what do those crows see as their own spirituality? What do we all see? And just trying to explore a bit more of that beauty in this. I wouldn't say this poem's necessarily beautiful. It's more angry, but that's all right. Old Gods. Lord, it's me, Conor. You know I'm about as anti-religious as it gets, and I haven't seriously considered a Christian God since I was 12 at the inner city native Bible camp outside of Regina, or the time I tried to impress a woman by knowing weird biblical facts. You can imagine how well that went over. But really, I just wanted to say that you should get the fuck out of Dodge. Your days on Kitaskinou are numbered, have been for a long time now. The old ones are coming back strong. They never left, just bided their time. And I can see them now in the whirlwinds that kick up on old northern lakes. And I can see them now in the back eddies on the rivers and creeks. And I can see them now in the new growth birch groves and forests. And I can see them now in the faces of those walking through downtowns. And I can see them now in the blazing orange fur of a newborn bison calf. And I can see them now in the etchings on bull moose antlers. Pretty soon, you'll be able to see them too. All right, I'm going to do one more. This poem is called What Do You Believe In? And it was initially written for the Mamawe Collective, which is a Métis community kind of grassroots organizing crew supporting thought leadership, each other in our creative endeavors, mainly based out of kind of the Red River territories in beautiful Winnipeg. Do you believe in the ghosts of aunties and uncles that drive old single bench pickup trucks spotted with bullet hole rust, sweetgrass and beaded necklaces dangling from the rearview mirror? Those who dream forever of empty stretches of prairie trail turned concrete road, passed over by generations of everyone who held the memory of you close. Those who believed in you, even when you didn't believe that the future could be infinite for all of us who live under and within endless sky, endless prairie wool, endless bison, and endless coveys of sharp-tailed grouse. Do you believe in sitting on the shores of the Saskatchewan River next to Naheoak cousins, planning out the moose hunts that will keep meat flowing back into Amiskwaciwaskahigan for another winter so all that of our relations can taste the blood and body of a true Eucharist, the earth made whole through the eyes of a 2-year-old bull moose, his flesh sustaining and forever nurturing our kinship spirits that only move us further toward understanding who we were always meant to be? Do you believe in the beauty and the wrinkles around an old lady's eyes while she sits wrapped up in a homemade quilt, sipping muskeg tea next to the wood-burning stove? Each line 1,000 laughs, 1,000 tears, 1,000 stories spilled out so that we can move forward in a good way, holding truth next to our hearts, sustained through the crackle of birch burning dark into the night, forever holding onto our place next to the grandmothers who defined what it means to be family. Do you believe in singing loud into the night, barn dances replaced by pubs and karaoke machines, potato champagne by cheap bottles of Pilsner? Oh no, not I will survive. Oh, as long as I know how to love, I know I'll stay alive. Rippling through the air to the backdrop of fading fiddles, spoons, and the tapping of beer bottles on hard-top tables, cards swishing as they're dealt high into the air. Bet on us because we're not going anywhere. Never will, never were, never will. Gloria Gaynor had it right all along. Do you believe in those who aren't born yet, those who will come after us, those who will take back the land from the idea of Canada and give it away to the grasses, eradicate the machinery, tear it down, build it up, believe in the words and the way that pride is written all over the faces of those who learn what it means to own ourselves, to never bow under hell on earth, to never step back but always move forward, knowing that within this landscape we are reborn, awoken, brought back by the artists and the writers, the poets and the dancers, the musicians and the lovers, the beaters and the hunters, because I do. I believe in everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Conor. Jen, you want to read next?
Sure. I. 'Cause. 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 I'll see.
All right, see how it feels.
Sitting down. Ginkgo tree. The deaths are often sooner than expected. Why? Did we think people had unlimited? Dip my toe in weather, faint up to heaven. They never guessed the cloud, scholars waiting, raining cold. I quickly mothered my way out of there into friends' apartments of incense and coffee, alley views. Awareness of tenderness, someone's good luck, someone gathering bottles, and now the clinking of the train.
I think I have to stand up. Do it? Yeah, I'm just, it's so tied to breath, reading, so sometimes, no, I'll just stay here, I think, if the mic will allow me. This one's called Come Together.
Tall enough to get away with it.
Just barely. Come together. This historical moment is overwhelming. You want other people to be more quiet more often. On the train, noise from everyone's phone. Crickets in cities are just a sad metaphor for not getting the expected response from an audience. Marble floors in a bank crack, but the revolving doors keep expelling the same face. It's not our father, or for that matter, our mother. Recording the hottest summer on record again as some late 60s tune plays from a loft. We hear it down on the street, and it seems more relevant now than it did then. But that's just perspective, I guess. Like the realization that we wasted autumn in stupid posturing and positioning, and now winter closes everyone's windows, and the songs are sealed up inside. Something about one of the poems that that Conor read made me want to switch up my playlist, but I don't know where. It's amazing how you can work so long on a book and still be like, what page was that on?
Who the fuck wrote these poems? Is what I'm always wondering.
There it is.
Procure. Those dirty books we managed to dodge, dusting off insufficient politics, not interested in polarizing rhetorics. Poet or politician scratches an itch behind ears, and I wake to silverfish digging a canal, run for hydrogen peroxide to sizzle it out. I am made a little holier with this view to water, this dress of dust turned suit of armor. My new acquaintance has written 3 beautiful books, seemingly in a moment. I watch them work. The ink runs out and they write words in the air that only a few can read. All the better, I hear a passing elder say as she boards a downtown train. Certain of our losses and little else we trail after, very inadequately thinking through a problem gifted to us by a crow. I thought Earth was screeching, but she was just speaking at the volume of fire. Just speaking at the volume of fire. And then this last one is for all of you, and it's called Dear Community. I'm not sure of the temperature, the timid nature of these words. Accepting your feedback, it hurts, and it's good enough. I'll take it. 10 hours of rain sounds from a YouTube video. The noise of the city, pile driving and grinding like teeth in the night. Lemon juice and water sipping clumps of pith. You think plump yeast, rosemary, and olive bread. I think dry cracker. That dust over there, that's us. I assume you brought your phone with you to New York, and I assume you'll bring me. A little piece of vitamin flashback. I remember that supermoon. I remember how loosely we danced. Fish are asking for another life. Very earnest, these symptoms born from a system built of paper and tired blood. Similar qualities shared on a blanket underneath a reaching magnolia flowering pink and white and pink and... One more question. Are we still in the same poem? I'm waiting for you in all of these rooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So wonderful to hear the Magnolia poem when we're seeing the magnolias. Yeah. All right, Sheryda.
I do have... Am I on? Hello? Thanks. Hello? I just picked up Conor's mic. Hello? There we go. Thank you. Some spring vibes here. A few selves ago, when I was living in Japan, a sort of reverie of that time. And I am going to mention a couple of book titles, and they're by the Japanese writer Yasunari Kawabata. Yeah. A Blue Filter. Traveling southbound 8:17 a.m. express. Book in hand could be snow country or 1,000 cranes. Blue flash in her periphery. She looks up. From the train window through late spring's foreign language, the book could be the sound of the mountain or the old capital. She looks up. Gold and white stipples the blue. Disruption to a green daily rhythm. Dozy passengers fail to notice. A door between compartments opens, generates a breezeway. Kawabata's voice over the loudspeaker. Paper ads sway and clack in the train's lurches. She considers her own noticing a virtue. Before it was an iris field, it was an ordinary field of wild grasses, soil, weeds, etc. Before the blue spear's sensing light struck upwards, broke the surface, the woman didn't think to wonder what might have been growing there. Before she reads, irises prefer to be in close proximity to humans. Before the paragraph when the iris motif appears on the girl's obi and later in a painting on the kitchen wall. Memory stores in roots, reblooms. Now she no longer recalls shapes or colors, only a sensation of irises. There, not there, even decades later, she recalls the field's noticing. slips in and out of time, disrupts, takes shape from memory, passed down through a blue filter, temporal ligature, triumphant motif, back and forthness, chorus of paper voices in the zigzag of time. 8:17 a.m. train appears, dissolves. She arranges her body iris side, is met with a thresh green line. In the middle of wild grasses, a blue vibration. No, it's the device buzzing in the field of her hand. Flowers cut, thrust into buckets, travel south in trucks to be plucked at the market, later to spy periscopic from alcoves, silhouettes against translucent screens, dynamic arrangements. Farmers gather at a picnic table in communion with this flowerless edge. The woman on the train is impermanent as an iris, not the same going into the city as she is coming home at night. Rush hour as buckets of irises spill from buckets at market stalls. She waits on the platform to transfer trains. A man in starched white gloves approaches from behind, shoves her body into the compartment of anonymous bodies. In the lurch, her face collides with a shoulder blade, eyes simultaneously close as the train travels underground, crush of impact lifts. A downy glove opens in the field of her mind. What hands, what cramped, what airless, what time, what hands, what lurch, what cramped. As the train accelerates, flower, body, retreat into private stations. A ruthless blue-gold loop. She shunts out the door into air, shoved up hard against absence. Even now, her body stores the feeling. She does a little research to find it. Lifeless in a glass case at the gallery decades later, another city, dates back to the 12th century. Bleached cotton makes hands easier to see. What does a glove dream as she wanders tiltingly from case to case and on into another room, a flattening well after she leaves the exhibit? Out-of-sequence fragments proliferate even decades later. Irises repeat across various feeds, stained glass, decorative paper, a blue burst from a party cracker. One of 3 spring colorways. Southbound across time. A train, many trains clack and sway, compartments empty and fill. Fields empty and fill, buckets at markets empty and fill. A man, many men appear, dissolve, many gloves, many trains, clack and sway, many hands fill. Memories in the body die down to the root, rebloom. Her body holds the long blue sentence of it. She looks up. Thanks. Can I get anyone some water? I'm going to do the awkward pouring now.
Yeah.
You can pay attention to Bronwen.
Okay, go for it. Yeah. All right. So I want to begin by asking maybe Conor and Jen, especially since Sheryda's busy with the water, but also both of you have written in other genres, so short story, novel, and I'm always curious, partly because, I work with people in these other genres. I'm always thinking what can happen in one genre, what that's different than what can happen in another. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you get, either as a reader or as a writer? Is that different? Is that the same from poetry that you don't find elsewhere?
I feel like poetry is where those kind of like absurd thoughts go to live on paper, where like fiction, it's actually like you're sitting down, you're working on it, you're trying to like get through it. You got like it's like fiction feels like a job, and it's like not a really necessarily like a good one. Like it's all right, but it's work. Like it's definitely work. Where like when you're like you could just like think of the most like weird thing for poetry, and then just like make your iPhone notes on it, and then maybe come back to the idea, maybe not. But like I got hit on the head by a shell when I was walking like under some trees on the seawall. And I was like, oh yeah, I could write a poem about that. Well, we'll see how that like turns out. And sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're not. But yeah.
So there's a kind of gathering to it. Any bit or piece of something could come in.
Yeah, it's like it's just like kind of that kind of. I feel that's where you can get your like weird perceptions of the world and really like explore those and like start thinking about that in a way too that you can't. I don't know. In fiction, I feel if you're like, and I don't do the like cross-genre experimental poetry within fiction or anything along those lines. Though I do feel that a lot of the poetry I write does have a narrative quality to it at the same sense, but you can just throw in those like weird, like those images that I don't know if they would necessarily work in a fiction contest. Like I just like.
So there's a kind of play maybe in poetry
like
for
this
you.
massive spoon like stirring False Creek up, and like how gross that would probably be, which is really unfortunate actually, 'cause it's such a beautiful space. But and then like what would come up from that? Like probably some sweet stories.
How about you, Jen? Similar, different? What do you find in poetry?
Reading, or both?
I mean, if they're different, I'd love to hear both.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, poetry was my first love in writing, and it continues to be just a huge passion. And I think in poetry, you can just find disjunctive leaps, worlds, thoughts, that you're not going to find anywhere else. And so it's for those of us who are obsessed, which I know is everyone on this stage and maybe some people in the audience, just those worlds that you're not going to encounter any other place. And poetry's willingness to not tell the whole story and to play with language and to linger and then move on. Right, and so it's and I mean, I write short fiction, so I've never written a novel or even tried, and I'm terrified of being called to write a novel. Actually, you are called. Yeah, I'm like, no, goddess, no, just dive under the stage. But I do think that that's why I'm drawn to short fiction. Is that short fiction can
Get
also
in, get out.
Yeah, and it can be really weird and really, disjunctive as well. And there's more in common between poetry and short fiction than I think. I mean, Chekhov said than the novel and the short story. So, yeah.
Cool. You want to add anything, Sheryda?
No.
No. All right. Then I'm gonna pick up
Poetry.
You're like, my faith has never wavered. I am. Yeah.
Pure love.
Yes. I mean, what you said about leaping made me think about the first poem in your collection, right? Which includes those lines, a friend who says he wants to take fewer leaps in his poems to stick a little longer with one thing. And that made me kind of pay attention. It's something I often think about. When do poems leap and when do they linger? I think is another word you just used, right? What is the kind of work of sustaining or staying, and what is the work of leaping? So be curious to hear how anybody thinks of that in their work. When do you stay, or when is a poem asking you to linger with something, and when do you leap? How do you decide to leap?
Maybe Sheryda will.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about this poem that I chose to read tonight. It was the memory of the iris field that just really would not release its grip. Like I just could not leave it.
Sort of obsessive circling of it.
Yeah, but having a really hard time writing it, describing it. And so it wasn't until I could try to create the sensation of it that I think that I got somewhere with it for myself, the memory, the reverie, the experience. Yeah.
I'd say maybe that's also a thing about poetry. Maybe you'd find a description of irises, but maybe like poetry has a special way to recreate the sensation or the experience of noticing through a kind of indirection.
like when I'm on, it was that feeling of being on
Yeah.
the train at the same time every day. That rhythm is still in my body. And there would be someone fast asleep beside me on the train, and I'd be like the only one really paying attention to what's going on. And the iris field would go by in such a blur, a second. The train would stop, and this person who was just fast asleep would be like, oh, that's messed up, and they'd be out the door. The rhythms in our bodies that we carry with us, and so there is leaping and lingering in that, isn't there? Like that notion of like you're resting, and then you're alert and you're up. But yeah, that repetition.
I was just thinking of like this old Métis mindset of my like grandparents, where you just linger all the time and for like so long.
It's a different relationship to time, maybe.
Yeah, they just
right?
like show up for weeks on end, and like they might leave, they might not leave. Well, we'll see what happens. But I was just thinking about like the imagery of that, because of just like these prairie scenes of just like the old pickup truck, you know, like going along, the farmer's finger like barely like twitching to greet someone, and just like trying to like linger in that like moment, I guess. And I think that's what a lot of that like mindset comes back to too, is just like lingering in those like memories and the creation of those memories, because you'll never necessarily like be there again, you know, you'll never be sitting around that same table with these same people in this exact moment. It's I know that's something I'm always trying to do, is like capture a little bit of that, and selfishly for my own memory too. And I'm just fortunate that some people want to read it here and there. But like I just really like, I like the idea of being able to capture some of those friendships and some of those memories and some of those like those conversations I had with my grandparents a long time ago now, and try to get them on the page and try to get that feeling out there as well with that.
Beautiful. So something I noticed across all of your books, which are different in many ways, but I noticed what I would say would be the presence both of something kind of visionary and prophetic, or kind of a seer, or, you know, mention to the old gods, right? They're coming, they've been here, right? There's an accessing of a register that I would see as a kind of visionary or prophetic mode in different ways, maybe more quiet ways here or more, you know, dramatic ways there, but in all the work. But also throughout the work, I noticed a real attention to the everyday, you know, the quotidian, the sort of, whether it's the child asking for more screen time in the middle of this otherwise lyric moment, or, you know, kart racing and suddenly it's Mario Kart, right? These sort of moments that puncture maybe the high lyric or the visionary moment. I'd love to hear about anyone. How do you think about bringing those threads together? Do they ever feel like they're clashing for you? Is it an intentional clash? How do you work with the everyday and with the kind of prophetic or the visionary in your work?
Thanks, Connor. He
Got the nod.
He gave me the nod.
All
I have nothing to say.
As you speak, it'll come. I believe it.
Please channel. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You can't like ask for a channel. Yeah, I guess just there's so many voices that want to come through in poetry.
Yeah.
And one of them, or some of them, have things to say about the future. And if anything, I was surprised by some of the hopefulness in this book, considering how hopeless I often feel. I don't know where those voices come from.
So then the work maybe is how to bring them next to each other and move between them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I have to think about it more. Maybe these smart people will help out.
Oh, I got this. Yeah. Yeah. You can round us out when I'm, I just listened to this really beautiful craft talk by the poet Matthew Olsman, and he was talking about defamiliarization, which is really just that artistic or poetic tool to take something really mundane and flash it in front of our eyes as if we're seeing it for the first time again. It's just like one of those, my favorite moves. Yeah. And all these poems did that. And but in that craft talk, he was just saying that you have to have the familiar to get the defamiliarization. You have to have the common things and the mundane things to get the elevated moment.
Everyday salami roses.
Yes, my everyday salami roses in another one of the poems is like, or swan napkins. Like, why do we fold napkins into swans? It's such a weird thing to do. Just that balance, I think, I agree with him. I think that does have to be there. You have to pull it through, but we also have to recognize the thing as well. So I don't know if that's quite so prophetic, but I do think about the transformation that happens from that ordinary to the extraordinary, yeah.
Or maybe, can I just, a thought just came, which is that depending on one's state of consciousness, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, but we don't know when that's going to happen or how, and in living or on the page, you know, so capturing it when we can, but often it's so fleeting.
Yeah, fleeting is right.
You said that so seriously.
It's fleeting
so
right now.
I was just, whenever I hear voices, I'm just, it always comes back to my grandmother, and I was just on the island. It was her 92nd birthday. She's this old Métis lady who's just a firecracker, and and I'm her favorite grandson because
of course.
I got a 29 one time and a hand a crib, and that made me her favorite grandson by like a long shot. Like, yeah, my other cousins like 24s max, 20s. They're not that good. But when I got lucky and got the 29, that made me her favorite grandson. But anyways, we were playing crib, we're hanging out there, and she goes to me and she's just like, "You're doing quite well with your little stories, eh?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they're all right, yeah." And but I just like her voice is just constantly. That's also the problem with growing up with your grandparents and being like right there. It's like got this constant like her voice in my head, but it's also like. It's very informative, actually, on like outside of all her like nuances and her incredible repertoire of moonshine recipes, but like being able to like actually just like bringing a lot of this like old Métis history and history of the land and history of the landscapes like into a lot of the work. And if it wasn't for like ladies like her and her sisters, the ones who came before them, who basically retained family history, kinship memory, all this vision for this landscape in the face of like the worst colonialism, it wouldn't be there. And so I'm always trying to like echo and try to share some of their own knowledge and wisdom within the words when they come out on paper.
Mm-hmm. I feel like in your work, Conor, there's a kind of use of humor to pivot and avoid having this kind of single posture. So you'll say something, very serious or very heavy, and then you'll kind of like knock your feet out from under yourself a little bit to like keep us on our toes. I appreciate that. But what you're talking about is making me think also what you said about feeling hopeful. And I feel like one thing poetry can do is offer us kind of ways of imagining what we might call the counterfactual, the sort of not what is, but what could be. And in the future, but I'd say also kind of counterfactual pasts. Like you have this poem, right? Like sort of what if this had happened? What if these people had done this instead? Counterfactual futures are sort of imagined another path that could come. And even sort of counterfactual presence, like what's there running underneath that's not noticed. I wondered if anyone wants to kind of pick a poem or a moment where they feel like they were working with poetry's ability to imagine another possibility and talk about that with us.
I definitely have one.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
You go first.
It's the last poem in the book. Where is the water in this story? They weren't very good MCs talking about pistols, lavender, and last call. I had joined their cult to disappear, and instead, they gave me their gold-plated deity. She said, "We're not finished yet." No, these deities aren't done yet. Any choir might remember forgiving a song, and those mean men out back burying another canister of cold silver. I kept thinking the lyrics would get better, that we'd all catch fire in our chests, shake out coins from pockets while changing clothes. But she was pissed. You can't trick a clairvoyant. Talking about you women, she meant the men, and those of us in between. She was serious, dishing up glasses of cayenne water to clear out the bugs crowding our intestines, each of her words a weightless orange. She suggested the disruption would be very interesting, or at the very least, possibly healing.
Thank you. You got a moment, Sheryda?
I was thinking of the first poem, actually.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the sensation of crushed velvet from when I was in high school, and I had a really beautiful crushed velvet dress that I wore to my grade 8 graduation.
I think it's back.
It's way back, and that's what this is kind of about. 3 women come toward me now up the city block in matching citrus tones, crushed velvet. On the off chance of catching a wayward spark, I swerve into their path. Lacking fluency, I fail to register. Desire, a material time turns outside in. This is not the first time this trend has cycled through in my lifetime. Across temporary scaffolding, flowers whirl on vines like sheets through dryer portals. I drift in and out of propped shop doors, obey the change room's sign by pulling the fine mesh bag over my face to safeguard the garment from the makeup I'm not wearing. In the mirror, a sapling wrapped in burlap against a wintry backdrop. When I remove the gauzy layer, I've doubled in age, and it's spring again. At the apothecary, I let the consultant test samples. Days, touchlessness, reversed. After rinsing me under lukewarm water, she makes a tidy package with the towel, unwraps the gift of my own hand.
I love that last line so much.
Thanks.
I mean, talk about defamiliarization,
Yeah.
right? It's sort of the hand as a gift, right, is suddenly strange to you in that moment. And I feel like it's kind of a time travel poem, right?
That's
like
right.
Time travel through sensation. Beautiful. Conor.
I don't know if this fits the criteria, but I'm gonna go with it anyways.
If you're feeling it, it fits.
I feel a lot of my writing has like this, like the idea of like a future going back to indigenous governance systems on whatever landscapes we're in.
Calling for the destruction and the replacement of a lot of things, right?
Yeah. So I wrote this poem for my friend Emily Riddle. She's an incredible poet in her own right, and also has a great book of poetry out called The Big Melt. So it's I'm really bad at titles. Like
Titles
just
are
like
hard.
trying to I just like think of I'm like I don't know, walleye, I guess. So Wishing on a Walleye, terrible title. This poem has nothing to do with wishes or walleyes.
False
And
advertising.
it's a good title. That is a good title.
I flick a hockey bro lighter and read your texts about the nuance of Elder's story. Put said lighter to sage, sit and smoke, start peeling the label back to expose its white beginnings and wonder what party I stole this lighter from back in the day. You run circles on old fur trade stomping grounds to bring warmth back in the body. I like to think that you're just imprinting more footsteps on the land so the ancestors know that you've returned home. Your own call out to their story. Love radiates throughout the land. I'll take my shirt off, sit and smoke at the top of the stairs that run up from the river valley, make the bros and broettes working out dodge my flabby bod as I soak in bird song until you decide to kick my ass for taking too long in delivering moose meat and a common understanding that working for bureaucracy sucks moose nuts. I'm continually dumbfounded by the way you can write history in the sky, paint water through veins, touch life back into concrete, troll wannabe politicians on Twitter. I want to be a bison herd with the strength to tear hooves through concrete and give you back all the downtown parking lots. I wish we only spoke in Naheawewan. I wish we never looked at the northern lights. I wish we could ride on crane wings on the thermals of the city. I wish we could bring back all the kids who never had a chance. I wish that the Oilers won the cup and then they turned the arena into the Papa's Chase Reserve. I wish they gave all that 50-50 money back to the people whose land they're playing hockey on. But I'll settle for kicking your ass in Mario Kart on the nightly.
Thank you.
She's going to hate that poem when I tell her
No,
it's her.
who could possibly? I have a few other questions, but I'd also like to welcome if anyone has a question in the audience. And then I'll pull up the iPad and see if anyone has a question in the remote audience as well. Yeah.
When you folks are building, I guess I was thinking of like a ride, and you're choosing your word selection and your mood, and you're being very specific about how this world is being built, that you want to take people on to experience the visceral feelings that you experience. And if your readers perceive something totally different, as honest as it can be, is that still equally, does it make you equally happy, or do you feel like, oh, you missed it? Because I assume it happens more in poetry than lots of other aspects of written.
Great. I'm just going to repeat your question, if I may, just in case anyone here or remotely couldn't quite hear. So it was a question about, as writers are composing their work and choosing words very carefully, still there must be a knowledge that a reader might take it differently, might see something there that wasn't on your mind, or might misread, and how you feel about that. Is there a kind of range of interpretations that you're fine with? Do you see it as a kind of co-creation of meaning, or are there ways to take it that would be like, no, this is not what I put out, and you're taking it in the wrong direction? Is that?
Yeah, very close.
Great.
Hell yeah. I think that
what?
everybody should I don't know. I feel that if you're reading something and you get your own perspective on it and you enjoy that, great, that's awesome. I mean, the words are there on the paper for everyone's own enjoyment and meaning. And I know I feel I read my poems a lot differently than the way that they're written too. There's a little bit of a nuance to that. And so people, if you're reading it, might see it a little bit differently than the way that it's meant to necessarily be spoken with the tone and the voice that's in there as well. But I'm a big I'm a big fan. I think that everyone should just read more. Poetry might not be for everyone, but
it is for everyone.
It is
Yes,
for everyone.
just gotta find the right flavor.
Yeah, except according to my one friend who told me,
They're
I'm
wrong.
going back to Edmonton this morning. I don't need to go to your poetry thing.
Oh, cold. I mean, I noticed
Deeply
actually
cold.
you one of the poems you only read a line once, because on the page it has the same, has here as in here and here as in here, right? So in the moment of performance, you're like, this is something that exists on the page, but maybe wouldn't exist in performance. So I was paying attention. I saw you do that. How about you, Sheryda?
Well, when you're sharing early drafts with friends or readers, it can be so productive or generative to have someone misread it, right? That can be amazing, because then you're like, oh, I did? I made you feel
Swerve,
that?
right?
Okay, yeah, I love that. So, no, I don't have any control over it after it's out of my hands. I think it's an experience or an encounter for someone to bring their own. I hope there's room for more of a reader's associations and imagination, and then they fill in those gaps for themselves. So I hope there isn't one way. I hope there's multiple pathways. Yeah.
Jen, anything to add?
I'm just in agreement, and I guess I'd just say that I almost assume that most readers will read it differently from how I do. And many times over the years, people have come up and like, that one poem, and they'll recite an image to me that isn't even in the poem. But I'm like, thank you. You know? I mean, it just, because then it's in your mind, it's like spark, 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 So, yeah.
I think that's always the case, and maybe we just notice it more with poetry.
We do, because again, it's so much more disjunctive, and there's so many more
Right.
leaps, and so much more room, to interpret.
It's always a co-creation and negotiation of what a reader brings.
In the times that I have written about my family, my grandmother has given me shit and been like, that maybe is how you experienced it. That is not how it was.
You're like, you're welcome to write your own poem, Grandma.
But the fact that your grandmother reads your poetry is pretty dope.
Well, I mean,
just saying,
she
be
might have,
thankful.
She might have skimmed for her name, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Grandma Rose.
Yeah. So in that regard, when someone that you know reads your poems and they perceive something of themselves, that can be tricky. But that's, neither here nor there.
Other questions? I see Fiona.
A question whether there are specific poetic forms in your books, your current books, or if your poems were informed by poetic forms or informed by a desire to subvert poetic forms.
Great. So this question is about the use of poetic forms within the book, maybe especially traditional forms, but maybe we could think about form more broadly. What formal gestures or moves are in your work, and do you see those either drawing on traditions or resisting traditions? If anyone wants to talk about that.
Sure. I'll try not to swear this time. I got one poem in this book. It's a long poem. It's almost 20 pages. And when I was crafting it, and it reads as a series of poems, so when I was crafting it together, it's not necessarily a traditional form, but I was thinking of basically almost on the one side, it's essentially driving directions, Edmonton to Saskatoon, Edmonton to Vancouver. And then on the other one, it's a little bit more of and it's more narrative on the left side of the page, where on the right side, it's more of an abstract kind of like memory, thought process, distillation. Yeah, it's just like, and I was really kind of very intentional with the creating and drafting of that poem compared to everything else, where I would say I don't really consider form whatsoever.
That one reminded me of a little bit of a high bun, because it had the sort of prose section and then a little compressed section, and it was also about travel. So
I don't know what that means.
could be accidental, could be still there.
It's a Japanese
I'm a reader.
form.
My opinion matters. No.
It's a Japanese form with a prose poem and a haiku at the end. So your distillation is like, see, it's cool. I was thinking a lot about visual art. So I was borrowing visual art forms. So I was playing around with collage a lot. And there are some actual collages in here, but I was also cutting up my drafts and moving them around and playing around like that and forming the poems that way. And definitely some subversion, I think. Some prose poems, moving around in prose a lot, and then these really small fragments. So of this lovely friend, Anne Simpson, who's a poet and fiction writer. She's very lovely, and she taught me a long time ago that a long poem, and these are primarily, this is a book of long poems, that a long poem has kind of two energies to it, like a centrifugal force and a centripetal force. And they sort of oppose or in tension with one another. And form is one of the things that I often put in tension with across a poem, like you're doing in your poem too. Yeah.
One way I think about form is sort of pattern and disruption of pattern at any level, and that might be patterns of sound or patterns of certain kinds of syntax. Does that speak to your book at all?
In this book, yeah, I mean, I actually am a secret closet formalist, and I write a lot of poems in form, Fiona. I don't know if you know that. I teach a class at Kwantlen on poetic forms, and we actually have just written haiboons and haiku, and then we had an extra day. I'm like, fuck it, we're gonna do the sonnet, and we did.
I do the sonnet.
It's always so hard.
I do the sonnet
Oh
with
man.
students, yeah.
Anyway, so my next book of poems will be a book of forms. I've been slowly working on it for 7 or 8 years.
Exciting.
And it's my students I have to thank, because I write every form with them to be in the process with them, because I'm like, how can I teach, a ghazal if I'm not writing the ghazal with them? So it's been a long, slow process. But in this book, there are a few prose poems. Yeah, I don't know that I'm doing anything out of the ordinary with what I usually do with form in this book. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
There was something actually, Jen, that you're doing that I noticed.
Oh,
that
good.
made me
Thank God.
think
This is, Bronwen, you're earning your money here.
All
This
right,
is what I
thank
want to
you.
hear. Thank you.
I mean, you have amazing verbs, for one thing, like really rocking the verbs. But also, there are moments where you use things sort of not quite grammatically, so say something like in our pockets in a
calling out my
seriously
grammar.
way. I love it. But all right, it made me think about the poet Harriet Mullen, who said, we comprehend poetry by paying attention to those places where the rules are broken. Those are signals to shift from literal to non-literal interpretation. And I felt like that was something that I noticed in your work, that the sort of like, oh, this isn't what I expected, a rule's being broken here, and it's telling me that I need to pay attention to something, whether it was utterances sort of not completing, or a kind of juxtaposition, or a sort of unexpected verb, or this seriously when we would expect serious, right? It's a moment that to me seemed like it was saying, a rule's being broken here, you need to pay attention to something.
Thanks for articulating that, and I love Harriet Mullen's work, so
good.
thanks for bringing her to this stage too. I think it's back to our bigger conversation about what poetry can do, and that's another way that poetry makes you pay attention. It doesn't lull you to sleep, an easy, fiction that you're just like, great, I can, I know what's going to happen next, and these are sentences and paragraphs, and boom, 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 I can do
No
this.
shade to commercial fiction.
I'm going to shame the shit out of it, but anyway, it's just a different experience. Again, those of us that love to be surprised, that love to have the rug pulled out of under
Those
our
of us
feet,
who love to be astonished, right? You
to
just
quote
talked about my life.
great
Yeah.
book and a great poem. So I think it's just one of the pleasures of reading, where you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. And, we want to be surprised. It's so exciting when you read work like that really makes you engage fully, and you can't fall asleep. Yeah.
Do you think maybe in a traditional form, there's a sort of balance between expectation and surprise that comes through the working out of the form, and then maybe if you're not working in a form, that balance of expectation and surprise enters through other means?
Are you talking about formal poetry or just?
Say maybe in a sonnet, you're like, I know a rhyme is coming, but I don't know what word is going to rhyme with it, right? I know that it's this long, but I don't know where it's going to travel along there. And it seems like when you're not working with a traditional form, you need to find other ways to work with expectation and surprise, balance between them. Yeah? Cool. All right, we got a couple questions from the remote audience, and one is about starting with an image. So do you start with an image before you write a poem? And I would maybe broaden that to say, like, do you start with an image? Do you start with a sound? Do you start with a question? What are some of your entry points to work? Do you gather? Do you collage? You talk about your drafts, right? How do things move from the beginning to what we see on the page?
There's always a gathering of scraps, so musical scraps, voices, overheard dialogue, image, things that I've noticed. And I hope capturing some of what we're talking about here, the fleetingness, or there's just this desire in me to record things, and especially those encounters with things that really surprise me, like you're just talking about with shifts all the time. But those unexpected moments, things my son says that is just hilarious, and memories. And yeah, so it becomes image, but I think it's a scrap. It's like a little fragment. It's sometimes just a word or a phrase, and yeah.
How do you move from poetic material to poem draft?
Connor?
Anybody?
We're going to turn it over to Connor now.
All right, Connor, now up to you. It sounds like you're a
long.
gatherer as
No,
well,
it's-
right? The
Oh,
phone
yeah, yeah,
notes,
yeah.
the shell dropped, right? So there's sort of
Yeah.
this material, and maybe it's all undifferentiated in a big document or in little scraps in this notebook or on the back of that receipt. How does that move into something you'd call a draft?
Just like iPhone notes, so many
Yeah.
iPhone notes and Google documents that go absolutely nowhere but have like 2 lines in them. So it's that's the hard process is like actually bringing it into something. And on kind of like a bummer story, but a guy I went to school with when I was quite young passed away quite young, and I was thinking a lot about him and how we used to, like when we were little kids, like running around in the hills of like Buffalo Pound Lake in southern Saskatchewan, and of course because he was from southern Saskatchewan, he was super cheesy, and so at his service they played like Bob Seger's Against the Wind, you know, and then I was like sitting in this, and I was like, oh, you would have that song as your funeral song, buddy. Anyways, we're sitting. I was down like in the train station catching the Canada line somewhere, and terrible line name, by the way. And I'm catching the train, and I've got my like headphones in. You know, it's on shuffle, and you can feel like the wind from the train coming at you. And so I'm feeling this wind like coming at me, and then soon like my song shifts to like Against the Wind, and I like just can't stop like thinking of this like Cody's face, you know, and I was like, whoa, like this is like I got to put this into a poem in some shape or form. So there's one in that book called Buffalo Pound about that, but it was just like that. It was like such a sensory overload, you know, of that like just the thinking a lot about him at the time, the train, the song, the wind, like all of it was just so like overpowering. I was like, I got to get something like this on paper, and so really, but that part is the hard part. Yeah. I know I didn't answer that actually, but yeah.
Connor, can I ask you a follow-up question? Please. Grill Connor. No, just kidding. I guess I'll just say one thing I really struggle with is having moments like that happen in real life and really wanting to get them on the page and feeling so unable to. And like the gap between that really profound and beautiful
The iris
experience,
moment, right?
You
That
know,
too.
and so do you struggle with that? How do you ever give up? How do you get it to the page?
I think sometimes it's got to like sit there for a while. You know, like that actually sat for probably like a year before I actually turned it into a poem that very like last minute made the cut for this book kind of thing. But even just like not on this book, but on the Avenue of Champions, like those stories needed like 10 years essentially before I was able and capable of like writing them in a way that kind of did them justice. And it was sitting on that, maturing a bit, thinking about it. But I'm also the biggest fan of just like, I learned this from Marilyn Dumont, amazing Métis poet. Just word blab, just type exactly what you're thinking and feeling, and just go and go and go and go and go and go. And then afterwards, you can go back and like pick out the gems from there and the sentences from there. And so I often do. I'll have like an idea in place, you know, go with that, and then just word blab and see if something beautiful can happen from that.
I think I used to think that the poem would just be in my head based on the experiences that I've had or the memories, and everything is just kind of like going through my brain. But then sometimes I'll write pieces and they'll just be sitting there, and they'll just be in my notebook, or they'll be into a draft. And then I will have an experience or an encounter in the world, and I'll realize, oh, that goes in that poem. So for me, it really is a collaging process. And so it really is about drawing, not just holding out for that piece that might show up at some point, that just might come and, oh, right, that's the thing that I needed. And then I kind of can pull it together. Pull it together.
Get it together poem.
That actually reminds me of another similarity I noticed across Jen and Sheryda, which is that Jen has a poem that says, "Hold the pen lightly," and Sheryda has a moment that says, "A hand loosely mends the damages." And to me, I felt like there was something speaking to each other there that I feel like you're talking about now. It's a kind of against a kind of rigidity or a grasping or a trying to hold things too tightly, that there's got to be some kind of looseness there or openness to being surprised or taking the swerve.
Where'd that line come from, Jen?
That's in the first poem dedicated to Raoul, actually.
Oh, Raoul.
Where are you, Raoul?
If y'all don't know Raoul,
friend. Where are
he's
you?
really great. He's a great guy. I was thinking about weaving practices,
Yeah.
of course. So there was actually like a literal weaving that was happening. But I just read Jen's book as well, and that struck me, that image of the lightness or the loose touch. You can't control it. You can't be too. I don't know if that's what it means for you. Here we have a very example of what you were
Right.
asking us about.
Yeah.
But for me, there was a careful, kind of hold steady moment in that line, I guess, or different for you, maybe.
Oh, no, I think so. Just, it's hard to articulate. I'm trying to think it through. Just that there always has to be enough space to let the surprise in and let
Yeah.
those, back to the many things
Can't
we've been
force
talking about.
it.
But yeah, you can't force it, but you have to work and you have to craft. But then this magic part comes in.
Yeah.
And I guess ego too, right? It takes ego to write, but you also, the porousness, there needs to be a porosity that will let other unexpected things into the work. Even sometimes things I don't want to let into the work. And then I have to sit back and be like, am I going to publish this? Am I really going to carry that forward? And sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes it's yes, depending on how brave I feel or, yeah. But that's also what's so exciting about it, right? That's what's so fun is like, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. It's such an adventure.
I think there's also a way that language is a material separate for us, right? And our intentions are part of it, but words have their own histories. Language has its own sounds. And so I think sometimes people think of language as, a very direct thing, and you say what you mean, or you think a thing and then you express it. But, I think Sheryda's book really makes clear, just as someone who's working with latex or weaving is working with a material, you're working with a material that has its own textures and its own histories, and it's a negotiation, right? Not only an intention. All right. I think we're just about out of time. Any final questions from those here? Yeah.
Mine is a simple one. I was just curious. Conor, you said a phrase I've never heard before. Thought leadership.
Oh, God.
He coined it, actually.
That's unfortunately my administrative work background coming into play there. But I know one the things, I guess the way I meant it though when talking about the Mamawe Collective was trying to recognize Indigenous peoples who carry a lot of knowledge, but it isn't necessarily recognized by a Western post-secondary system. So I got lots of friends who are incredible hunters, incredible on the land, they carry a lot of knowledge and history and stories, but it would never be recognized within a Western system. So trying to put some, not necessarily capitalize that, but more put it a value kind of term on it so that we're properly giving them respect in a good way.
Thank you. You're also making me think that when we're working with poems, we're working with a material that's also used to advertise, to convince people to do things in bureaucracies, right? So there's also a way that the same words we're using, are used for all these other purposes. And so that means something about what we're trying to do with them in a poem, whether it's acknowledge that other context or wrestle them back into some other kind of meaning. It's hard work, and we're grateful to you for doing it and for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. So thanks so much to Conor, Sheryda, and Jen.
Thank you, Bronwen.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bronwen. Thanks, audience.
Hello, thank you everybody for being here tonight. Thank you, Sarah and the Writers' Fest for curating and organizing this event. Our friends from the Book Warehouse are here selling all the books over there, and the poets will be sitting at that table where Candy is standing right there to sign them. Before you go, I wanted to tell you about 2 events coming up here quick at VPL. Starting next week, we'll be kicking off our Uplift Asian series, which celebrates Asian cultures and perspectives and serves to push back against anti-Asian racism in our communities. The event lineup is on our website if you look for Uplift Asian, and the kickoff event will be right here on April 12th, next Wednesday, with Lindsay Wong presenting her new book, Tell Me Pleasant Things About Immortality. Don't miss that. And next Thursday, April 13th, we're hosting our next Opera Adventures event. Learn all about the upcoming Vancouver opera production of The Flying Dutchman with an evening of tantalizing performances and presentations by the artists and experts who make our local opera scene come to life. This 1-hour program of music and conversation will explore the life and musical influences of Richard Wagner, why his opera is particularly challenging for singers and musicians. And of course, we have our upcoming slate of Incite authors still to come as well this year. So I hope you all come back, and thank you for joining us, and have a great night tonight, everybody. Thank you.